If I had known my sister's definition of couples only included her dog and my ex, I would have never agreed to this trip. The text she sent me 2 weeks ago was annoyingly chipper. Julia, it'll be great, just couples, good food, and a break from the city. You need this. I'd been single for 3 months, and Emily knew it. She also knew I was still raw from the breakup with Daniel, the kind of wound that makes you question if you'll ever feel whole again. But she insisted, and I relented, thinking maybe I'd find some peace, or at least a distraction. The drive to the cabin was long enough for doubts to creep in. I rehearsed polite smiles, imagined awkward silences, and braced myself for the inevitable barrage of "you'll find someone" comments. I didn't expect to be greeted at the gravel driveway by Emily's golden retriever, Max, barking and leaping as if he owned the place. I also didn't expect to see Daniel's car parked beside Emily's. My stomach dropped. This had to be a mistake. Emily appeared on the porch with a wave. Her smile too wide. Surprise, Daniel's here. He needed a break, too, and Max wouldn't let me leave him behind. She tossed her hair like she'd just solved a complicated equation. I stood frozen, suitcase in hand. Heart thudding. Daniel emerged from inside, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking up to meet mine. He looked as uncomfortable as I felt. "Hey, Julia," he said, voice low. "Hi," I managed, keeping my tone neutral. I wanted to turn around, get back in my car, and drive until the memory of this place faded. But Emily hugged me before I could move, Max's fur pressing against my legs. Inside, the cabin was cozy but cramped. The living room was cluttered with board games, mismatched mugs, and a pile of dog toys. Emily had already claimed the master bedroom for herself and her boyfriend, Tom, who was apparently arriving later. That left Daniel and me with the 2 small guest rooms across the hall from each other. The walls were thin. Emily launched into her plans for the weekend: hiking, cooking together, movie nights, and bonding. I nodded along, trying to ignore the way Daniel kept glancing at me. Max sprawled across my feet as if to anchor me in place. Dinner was awkward. Emily chatted non-stop, filling the silences with stories about work and Tom's latest antics. Daniel and I exchanged polite comments about the food, careful not to stray into dangerous territory. Every so often, Emily would steer the conversation toward memories we all shared, trips we'd taken, holidays spent together, forcing Daniel and me to relive moments that now felt brittle and distant. After dinner, Emily suggested a walk. The air outside was crisp, the path behind the cabin winding through tall trees. Max bounded ahead, nose to the ground. Emily walked between Daniel and me, oblivious to the tension. She talked about her new job, her plans for the future, her dreams of moving to the coast. I listened, half present, my mind drifting to the last time Daniel and I had walked together like this, before everything fell apart. Back at the cabin, Emily disappeared to call Tom, leaving Daniel and me alone in the kitchen. The silence was heavy. I busied myself with dishes, scrubbing harder than necessary. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said quietly. "Same," I replied, not looking up. I could feel his eyes on me, searching for something: regret, forgiveness, maybe just acknowledgement of the mess we were in. "I thought you'd want to avoid this," he said. "I did," I answered, voice sharper than I intended. I set a mug on the rack, hands trembling. But Emily has a way of getting what she wants. Daniel laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar. "Yeah, she does." We stood in silence, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator and Max's paws clicking on the floor. I wanted to ask him why he came, what he hoped to gain from this forced reunion, but the words stuck in my throat. Later, in my room, I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. I could hear Daniel moving around in the room across the hall, the floor creaking under his weight. I wondered if he was thinking about me, about us, or if he was just as eager to escape as I was. Sleep didn't come easily. I replayed the evening in my mind, searching for clues, for meaning. Was Emily trying to fix us, or just oblivious to the pain she was causing? Did Daniel regret coming? Did I? The next morning, Emily was already up, brewing coffee and frying eggs. She acted as if nothing was wrong, as if we were all just old friends on a fun weekend getaway. I envied her ability to ignore the obvious dot as we sat around the table, Max begging for scraps. Emily announced the day's itinerary, a hike to a nearby waterfall, followed by a picnic. Daniel looked at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded, resigned. There was no escaping this dot as we packed our bags and laced our boots. I caught my reflection in the window. I looked tired, wary, but also determined. I wasn't sure what the weekend would bring, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let Emily or Daniel define my story. Not this time. The trip had only just begun, and already the cracks were showing. But beneath the discomfort, a strange sense of anticipation stirred in me. Maybe, just maybe, this was the confrontation I needed. Maybe it was time to face the past and finally move forward, no matter how much it hurt. The waterfall trail was steeper than I remembered, and Emily's relentless cheerfulness grated with every step. Max darted ahead, tail high, while Daniel lingered behind, his silence loud enough to fill the gaps Emily left. She kept up a steady stream of chatter, asking about work, about friends I hadn't seen in years, about anything except the obvious tension hanging between us. I tried to focus on the crunch of gravel under my boots, the rhythm of my breath, anything to keep myself from spiraling. Halfway up the trail, Emily stopped abruptly and turned to face me, her expression suddenly serious. "Julia, I know this is weird, but I thought maybe you and Daniel could talk, really talk. You both deserve closure." She glanced at Daniel, who looked away, jaw clenched. I felt a surge of irritation. Who was she to decide what I needed? "I'm fine," I said, too quickly. "Let's just get to the waterfall." Emily hesitated, then shrugged and whistled for Max, who bounded back, tongue lolling. We continued in uneasy silence, the forest pressed in around us, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. I could feel Daniel's gaze on me, heavy, an uncertain dot at the waterfall. Emily spread out a blanket and began unpacking lunch. I sat at the edge, watching the water tumble over rocks, trying to steady my thoughts. Daniel joined me, sitting just close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. "I didn't want to come," he said quietly. Emily convinced me. I stared at the water, unsure what to say. "She has a way of doing that." He nodded. "I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe it would help." I let the silence stretch. Part of me wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Another part wanted to run. "Help what?" I finally asked. He hesitated. "Help us move on, or at least not hate each other." I looked at him then, really looked. He seemed older, more tired. There was a vulnerability in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "I don't hate you," I said, surprising myself with the truth. I don't know how to be around you." He nodded, staring at his hands. "Me neither." Emily called us over for sandwiches, her voice bright and insistent. We joined her, the three of us sitting in a rough triangle on the blanket. She launched into a story about her job, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness to fill the space. I watched Daniel pick at his food, his shoulders tense. Max circled us, nose twitching, before collapsing at Emily's feet. After lunch, Emily suggested we write down something we wanted to let go of and toss it into the water. "It's symbolic," she said, handing us scraps of paper and a pen. I rolled my eyes but took the paper. Daniel hesitated, then scribbled something quickly. I stared at the blank page, my mind racing. What did I want to let go of? Anger, regret, the version of myself that had loved Daniel so fiercely. I wrote one word: blame. We stood at the edge of the water and, one by one, tossed our papers in. Emily cheered, Max barked, and for a moment, I felt lighter. But as we packed up and started back down the trail, the weight settled on my shoulders again. Back at the cabin, Tom had arrived. He greeted us with a bear hug and easy laughter, immediately shifting the energy in the room. He and Emily disappeared into the kitchen to cook dinner, leaving Daniel and me alone in the living room. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," Daniel said suddenly, "for everything." I looked at him, searching his face for sincerity. "It's not that simple." He nodded. "I know, but I needed to say it." I sat down, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle into my bones. "Why did you really come, Daniel?" He hesitated. "I wanted to see if we could be friends, or at least not strangers." I considered this. Was friendship possible after everything? Did I even want that? Before I could answer, Emily called us to dinner. The meal was lively, Tom's jokes filling the room with laughter. For a while, I let myself be swept up in the noise, grateful for the distraction. But beneath it all, the questions lingered. What did I want from Daniel, from Emily, from myself? That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the day's conversations, the hike, the waterfall, the confessions. I realized I was tired of carrying old wounds. Maybe Emily was right, maybe it was time to talk, to really talk, and finally let go. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deeper than it had been in months. For the first time, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Maybe this trip, as uncomfortable as it was, could be the start of something new, not a return to what was, but a step toward what could be. The morning started with the smell of coffee and the low hum of voices drifting from the kitchen. I lingered in bed, listening to the muffled laughter of Emily and Tom, the occasional bark from Max, and the quiet clink of dishes. For a moment, I let myself believe I was somewhere else. Someone who hadn't spent the night turning over old memories, wondering if forgiveness was possible or even necessary. When I finally emerged, Emily was already bustling around, planning the day with her usual enthusiasm. "We're going into town," she announced, her eyes bright. "There's a little market, some shops. It'll be fun." She glanced at me as if searching for resistance, but I just nodded. Anything to avoid another day trapped in the cabin. With Daniel and my thoughts, the drive into town was filled with Tom's stories and Emily's laughter. Daniel sat beside me in the back seat, quiet, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. The silence between us was less sharp than before, softened by the previous day's confessions. Still, I kept my distance, unsure if I was ready for more. The market was crowded, the air thick with the scent of fresh bread and spices. Emily and Tom disappeared into a stall selling homemade jams, leaving Daniel and me standing awkwardly by a display of pottery. I picked up a mug, tracing the uneven glaze with my thumb. "Do you remember that trip to Asheville?" Daniel asked, suddenly, his voice low. I nodded, surprised by the memory. "You broke your favorite mug." He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him all weekend. "You glued it back together. It leaked, but I kept using it anyway." I laughed, the sound surprising both of us. For a moment, the tension eased, replaced by something gentler, nostalgia, maybe, or the simple relief of shared history. Emily reappeared, her arms full of jars. "Come on, let's get lunch." She led us to a small cafe, where we squeezed around a tiny table. The conversation turned light, Tom's humor smoothing over the rough edges. I watched Daniel relax, his shoulders loosening as he joined in the laughter. After lunch, we wandered through the shops, Emily darting from window to window, Tom trailing behind her. Daniel and I fell into step together, our conversation tentative, but honest. He asked about my job, my friends, the things I'd done since we broke up. I answered, careful not to reveal too much, but grateful for the chance to talk without the weight of expectation. As the afternoon wore on, I realized how much I'd missed this simple companionship, the ease of being known. But I also recognized the distance that had grown between us, the ways we'd changed. Daniel was still familiar, but he was no longer the person I'd built my future around, and I was no longer the woman who had needed him to feel complete. Back at the cabin, Emily suggested a game night. We gathered around the table, laughter spilling into the corners of the room. For a few hours, the past receded, replaced by the present, messy, imperfect, but real. Later, as I stood on the porch, the cool air biting at my skin, Daniel joined me. We stood in silence, the darkness pressing in around us. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. I looked at him, searching for the right words. "I am too. I think I needed this more than I realized." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Me too." We stood there for a while, the silence comfortable for the first time. I felt something shift inside me, a loosening, a letting go. The anger, the regret, the longing for what might have been, they were still there, but they no longer defined me. When I finally went inside, I felt lighter. The weekend wasn't over, and there were still questions to answer, wounds to heal. But for the first time, I believed I could face them not as the person I had been, but as the person I was becoming. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about the days ahead. There would be more conversations, more moments of discomfort and growth, but I was ready. Whatever happened next, I knew I wouldn't face it alone, not because I needed someone else, but because I had finally found my own strength. The next day, the cabin felt smaller. Tension, once subtle, now pressed against every conversation. Emily's optimism seemed forced, her voice a little too bright at breakfast as she mapped out another group activity. Tom, sensing the shift, tried to keep things light, but even his jokes couldn't mask the undercurrent. Daniel and I exchanged glances, both aware that something had to give. Emily announced a canoe trip on the lake, insisting it would be good for all of us. I hesitated, but Tom's encouragement and Daniel's silent nod left me with little room to refuse. We loaded the canoes, Max whining on the shore as we pushed off. The water glassy and still beneath us, Emily and Tom took one canoe, their laughter echoing across the lake, while Daniel and I shared the other, paddling in uneasy silence. Halfway across, Daniel stopped paddling. The canoe drifted, the only sound the gentle splash of water against the hull. He turned to me, his face serious. "Julia, we can't keep pretending everything's fine. Not after everything we've been through." I gripped my paddle, unsure how to answer. The lake stretched out around us, vast and empty, offering no escape. "I know," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked down, gathering his thoughts. "I keep thinking about what went wrong, about all the things I should have said or done differently. I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know it." The words hung between us, raw and honest. I felt the old ache in my chest, the familiar sting of regret. But I also felt something new, a sense of relief, the weight of unspoken words finally lifted. "I hurt you too," I admitted. I held on too tightly. "I expected you to fix things I needed to fix myself. Maybe we both wanted things the other couldn't give." Daniel nodded, his eyes shining with emotion. "I think we lost ourselves trying to be what we thought the other wanted." We sat in silence, the canoe rocking gently. For the first time, I saw Daniel not as the man I'd lost, but as someone who had been lost, too. The anger faded, replaced by understanding. Emily and Tom paddled over, their faces flushed with laughter. Emily called out, "Race you to the dock." Daniel and I exchanged a look, and for the first time all weekend, we both smiled, a real, unguarded smile. We paddled hard, laughing as we reached the shore together, breathless and lighter than before. Back at the cabin, the mood shifted. Emily sensed the change, her relief palpable. That evening, as we sat around the fire pit, she finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Julia, are you okay? I know I pushed you into this trip. I just wanted us all to be together again." I looked at her, my sister, the person who had always tried to fix things, sometimes making them messier in the process. "I know, Em, and I'm glad you did, even if it hurt. I needed to face this." She reached over, squeezing my hand. Tom offered me a marshmallow, his smile warm and steady. Daniel sat across from me, his gaze gentle, no longer haunted by the past. As the fire crackled, we shared stories old and new, letting the laughter and warmth fill the spaces that had been empty for too long. I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a series of choices, each one bringing me closer to peace. Later, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the confusion, the anger, all of it had shaped me, but none of it defined me anymore. I was ready to let go, to move forward, not because everything was resolved, but because I had finally accepted that some things never would be. Tomorrow, we would leave the cabin and return to our separate lives, but I knew I would carry this weekend with me, a reminder that healing is messy, that closure isn't always neat, and that sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that set us free. The final morning at the cabin arrived with a quiet that felt different, not heavy, not tense, but calm, as if the space itself had exhaled. I woke early, the house still, and lay there for a moment, letting the reality of leaving settle in. There was no urge to escape, no tightness in my chest. Instead, I felt a gentle anticipation, the sense that something had shifted for good. Packing was a silent ritual. I folded my clothes with care, placing each item into my bag as if closing a chapter. When I stepped into the kitchen, Emily was already there, pouring coffee, her movements slower than usual. She looked up and smiled, a quiet understanding passing. Between us, there was no need for apologies or explanations anymore. We had said what mattered. Tom and Daniel joined us soon after, Max trailing close behind, tail wagging. Breakfast was simple. The conversation was easy, marked by the kind of laughter that comes when people have nothing left to hide. Emily recounted a story from the canoe race. Tom teased her, and even Daniel joined in, his eyes meeting mine with a warmth that was new, gentle, unburdened. As we loaded the cars, Emily pulled me aside. "You know, I worried I'd ruined everything bringing you both here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I see you now, and I think maybe it was the right kind of mess." I hugged her, holding on a moment longer than usual. "It was hard," I said honestly, "but I needed it. I needed all of it." Daniel waited by his car, hands in his pockets, uncertain. I walked over, feeling no trace of the old anxiety. "Thank you for coming," I said, meaning it. He nodded. "I'm glad I did. I hope we can keep talking, maybe not as we were, but as we are now." I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. I'd like that. The drive home was different from the drive up. The landscape passed in a blur, but inside I felt rooted, steady. I replayed the weekend in my mind, not the pain or the awkwardness, but the moments of honesty, the laughter, the forgiveness. I realized I was no longer waiting for closure from someone else. I had given it to myself. Back in my apartment, I unpacked slowly, letting the silence settle around me. There was no emptiness, no ache. Instead, I felt a quiet pride in the woman I was becoming, someone who could face the hardest conversations, who could forgive, who could let go. Emily called that evening, her voice bright with relief. "Next time, just us," she joked. I laughed. "Next time, just us." Before bed, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in months. I wrote about the trip, about Daniel, about Emily's stubborn hope. I wrote about forgiveness, about the courage it takes to let go of blame, about the freedom that comes from accepting what cannot be changed. As I closed the journal, I realized I was not the same woman who had arrived at the cabin, heart bruised and wary. I was stronger, softer, more open to the uncertainty of what comes next. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer held me captive. I turned off the light, settling into the quiet with a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. The trip was over, but something new had begun, a life shaped not by old wounds, but by the possibility of healing, of connection, of moving forward. And for the first time, that felt more than enough.